Mrs. Baker. I am the head of middle school here at Sycamore School. Welcome to our school. I'm so glad you're here. What you're learning about and doing is just amazing, and I hope it is inspiring for you as you grow and find your passions and learn about things that you really love. I hope this is an inspiring day for you. We have an amazing speaker today, Dr. Zimmerman. I'll introduce in a second. What I do ask is that we are a really respectful audience today. And what that means is that if you could put your phones away so that your attention is on Dr. Zimmerman, that would be wonderful. Also, if you would try to not have side conversations with the person next to you, that is also a respectful audience member. And then I know you just came from lunch and I see some delicious cookies out and stuff, but it's really distracting when we have a lot of like noise and crinkling and stuff. So if we can put that away, that would be wonderful too. Okay, Dr. Zimmerman is here. She was born and raised in Indiana and loved being outdoors while she was a kid. She graduated from Indiana University in School of Medicine in 2010 and has completed an emergency medicine residency in Michigan in 2013. She has been working in Indiana ever since, so if you happen to be maybe at St. Vincent's in the ER here in Indianapolis, you might run into Dr. Zimmerman. She has been continued to nurture her love of outdoors in her free time and has found her passion in mountain climbing. She has summited Mount Everest in 2022, a feat that completed her goal of climbing the 7 summits. If you're not familiar with that term that means you've climbed the highest mountains on all 7 continents. And she's also embraced her professional ambitions by becoming this year's president of the Indiana chapter of the American College of Emergency Physicians. I cannot wait for you to hear Dr. Zimmerman's presentation. She has amazing pictures and will share amazing stories from her adventures as climbing. And I hope, again, this inspires you to set some really awesome goals for yourself. And even if that goal right now is not totally formed in your mind, that's okay. But just know that there's ways that you can combine lots of passions in your life together into one thing. And so I'd like to welcome Dr. Zimmerman. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining me today. I'm here to talk about goals in general, but also my favorite thing, which is mountain climbing. So mountain climbing is not something that I knew was a thing when I was your age. I didn't realize that somebody could get to the top of a mountain at all, let alone somebody from Indiana with no mountain climbing experience, but here we are. I loved being outside when I was a kid though. I loved climbing trees, I loved hiking, I loved backpacking and camping, and my family used to do that for vacation all the time. So I got through high school and college, and then when I was in medical school, my dad called me kind of out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, you want to go climb a mountain?" And I thought, well, yeah, I guess. So he gave me the name of a mountain. It wasn't Mount Everest, but it was a moderately difficult mountain in Montana known as Granite Peak. And Granite Peak was an area in Montana that I was familiar with in the past with some previous camping and hiking experience, and I looked at what it took to climb this particular mountain. I also learned that there was a climbing school that I could attend that would give me some of the skills and techniques required to get to the top of this mountain, so I said, sure, yeah. So I started exercising, I started lifting weights, I started getting on the stair climber, and in 6 months after my dad called me, we headed out to Montana, did the climbing school, and we got to the top of Granite Peak, Montana. It was very difficult. I actually had a little bit of a fear of heights when I first did mountains, and getting past that and really exerting myself after setting such what I thought was a lofty goal for myself when I sat at the very top of the mountain and looked out over these beautiful vistas. And I looked at the path that I had come down and I saw how hard I worked to get to the top of that mountain, and the feeling of exhilaration at getting to the top, that was so important to me. And it was so impressive. So mountain climbing became a love and a passion of mine ever since that trip. I was in medical school though, so we didn't have a ton of time, but whenever I had time off, I would try to expand my techniques and skills that I learned so I could set a better foundation for mountain climbing. So a couple of years after I climbed Granite Peak, Montana, I wanted to learn more about how to climb a glacier and how to safely cross something known as a crevasse, which is a crack in the glacier. I wanted to learn how to use crampons, which are spikes that stick to the bottom of your boots. So I picked Granite Peak, which is in Wyoming. So I trained as I had. I learned from some of the things that I wish I'd done better on Granite Peak. And I set off with these ladies. And since I went with my dad on the first climb, after learning some extra stuff, he came with me and we got to the top of Granite Peak. So from there, I felt like I learned a lot, but I still had more I wanted to learn. I was still in medical school at the time, and I did a medical exchange program with a medical school in Kenya. So I learned some things in medicine while I was in Kenya, but while I was there, I had the opportunity to go to Mount Kilimanjaro, which is in Tanzania, not too far. And this was where I could really learn about altitude medicine. Granite Peak and Granite Peak were below 14,000 feet apiece. Kilimanjaro is over 19,000 feet. Once you get above 14,000 feet, you can get something known as altitude sickness, which is where you go up so high that your body doesn't adjust, which can lead to life-threatening problems if not appropriately managed. But you can mitigate this with acclimatization techniques and medications and certain breathing techniques. And so I wanted to do Kilimanjaro so that I could expand on that repertoire that I was developing. I was able to do so, and I got to the top of Kilimanjaro in 2010. From there, I went to residency, and for anybody who's a physician, residency is referred to as a mountain that you have to climb, at least in my residency program. And from there, I thought it was very cool to have a metaphorical mountain, which was residency, and then to actually supplement that with literal mountains. And with each mountain that I climbed, I picked out a certain skill that I wanted to perfect or hone. And the next thing I wanted to learn was how to get across crevasses using additional equipment such as ladders and how to climb the rope team. And so climbing a rope team kind of helps you get across crevasses safely. And so I chose Mount Rainier in 2012 for that. I also used the opportunity to learn how to use an ice axe safely and effectively. And so I did another climbing school. I was able to learn all of these techniques and make it to the top of Mount Rainier. And so again, I was galvanized by this, and I decided that I wanted to learn even more. So by the time I got to the end of residency, which I thought was a hard mountain from a metaphorical sense, I decided to do Denali, which is an extremely difficult mountain. It is the highest mountain in North America, and it's 20,320 feet, which is taller than Kilimanjaro. So this was going to be an opportunity for me to expand on what I had already learned and also learn some new things. So Denali has a lot of glacier activity on it. And so glaciers is what we end up using to walk on, travel on, sleep on. Crevasses also open up in glaciers, and so we have to learn how to mitigate that as well. Since Denali's in Alaska, we also have to deal with very cold temperatures and sometimes blizzard-like conditions. Denali was also interesting in the fact that I had to learn how to do expedition mountaineering. What that means is we carry everything that we need to survive on our backs, or we drag it in the sled behind us. These packs weigh up to 60 pounds apiece, and the sleds weigh up to 50 pounds apiece. And that's what that looks like. So it was a very good learning experience for me. It took me about a month, but ultimately I made it to the top of Denali. While I was there, I learned that I had climbed 2 of the 7 summits. One of the guys said that to me kind of an offhand comment, and I was like, well, what's the 7 summits? And it's a goal that some mountain climbers have where they climb the highest mountain on each continent. And I thought that was a cool goal, and I already done what many consider to be one of the hardest of the 7, which was Denali. So I decided I was going to go ahead and give that a try. So I climbed Mount Elbrus, which is Europe's highest point. I climbed Aconcagua, which is South America's highest point. I climbed Kosciuszko in Australia. I then decided I wanted to learn a little bit more. To me, cold was a little bit intimidating to deal with at first because frostbite's a problem, wind burn is a problem, and then having your water freeze is a problem. So I wanted to learn more about that. I also wanted to gain some independence with my mountain climbing. So Alaska seems somewhat remote, but it is nothing compared to Antarctica, which is what I did next. which you can see we are self-supporting. This camp here is the closest camp for a 2-day hike. And so we learned how to manage that. I also got stuck in a blizzard at 12,000 feet for 2 days and had to learn how to deal with living in a tent without losing my mind. And while I was there, I worked with a climbing guide named Dave. Dave had climbed Everest 15 times, which is more than any non-Sherpa. He held the world record until 2 years ago. And he was my climbing guide, and while we were climbing in Antarctica, he got to observe my climbing patterns and kind of my overall approach to mountain climbing. And he told me at the end of the trip, he said, you know what, if you want to climb Everest, you can do it. You just have to increase your cardiovascular fitness. And I said, well, okay. And at that time, I really hadn't planned to climb Everest. I didn't think it was something that I was capable of doing, but when he said that, it kind of stuck with me. So I got home, I went back to work, and over time I started thinking about it, and I started looking at the criteria. And I checked off all the criteria. I had the experience, I had the altitude exposure, I had done expedition mountaineering where you carry all your stuff with you, and I'd worked in remote areas. I was also in pretty decent shape, so after talking it over with my family, we decided to go ahead and give it a try. So Everest is 29,000 feet tall, which is 5.5 miles vertically into the air. And so a lot of altitude changes are more stark at that altitude. This is also so high that you need to use oxygen to be able to climb safely, and that's something I'd never done. So I learned how to scuba dive so I could get used to having a mask on my face. I trained and I ran in a marathon, and I did a lot of cross training. After that, I decided I was going to go to Nepal for my Everest expedition. You could go through the Chinese side or the Nepalese side because Mount Everest actually sits on the Nepal-China border. And so both countries have that possibility, and I chose Nepal. And after a couple of years of training and getting prepared, we actually took this helicopter from Kathmandu, Nepal, which is the capital, to Lukla, which is the starting point for the climbing expeditions and the base camp trekking expeditions. This is known as the most dangerous airport in the world, the Tenzing Norgay Airport. So the mental challenges were not just the mountain, it was landing in this airport. It was climbing over these suspension bridges. It was making sure that the yaks didn't knock you off the trail. And then it was getting used to seeing these mountains every day and realizing we were going to climb the highest one. These were such beautiful mountains that I would recommend to anyone to just go take a look at. They are so beautiful, it's so peaceful, and the country is so pretty. As we got closer, we started seeing what our goal was going to be. And this is the Khumbu Glacier. And as we talked about earlier for Denali, the glacier is where we ended up spending a lot of our time. So base camp, which we finally got to, this is my tent here that I spent 2 months in, is actually on the glacier. That is a very thin layer of rock. And so when you sleep and you put your head on your sleeping pad at night, you can hear the glacier moving and shifting and cracking and popping. You can hear avalanches and rock fall every hour. So getting used to that was a little bit of a challenge. From there, this wasn't even Everest in the background. The scale of the mountain is so great that is the west buttress, which keep this in mind because you'll see another picture and I'll point it out. Everest is actually behind that and even taller. So we had to get used to working with each other as a team. So we did a climbing practice mountain, which was Lobuche. So we left base camp and climbed Lobuche. Now we climb at night because the sun, when it hits the ice and snow, can actually heat up the water and cause it to melt. This can cause the snow formations and the ice formations to become unstable. So we want to climb at night so that we get to the top of the mountains at dawn, which is what we actually were able to do for Lobuche. And this is actually where we got to work with our guides and our teammates so that we climbed efficiently and safely through the anchor points, clipping in and clipping out of the rope. This is Mingma, this is the climbing Sherpa that worked with me through the Everest expedition. From the top of Lobuche, I was able to see Everest and the west buttress that I pointed out. That's actually that mountain there, and that is Everest several thousand feet above it. So I finally figured out what I was actually going for, and it was not quite as I thought, even though I'd done hours and hours of research. From Lobuche, we went back to base camp, and then we had to figure out our strategy. So base camp is one of 5 camps if you're going to try to summit Everest. For the trekkers, you go to base camp and you leave and you're done. For us, we had to go through something called the ice fall. The ice fall is where the glacier comes down the mountain, and as it goes through a tunnel, it gets pressed by the sides of the mountain, and so it breaks up into big chunks. These chunks kind of lay on each other in a very haphazard manner, and when that radiant heat from the light of the sun hits it, it renders everything inherently unstable. That's the route that we use to go to Camp 1. And Camp 1 is the basis for Camp 2, 3, and 4. So we had to go through that so that we could acclimatize 4 times up and down. So when we acclimatize, as you remember, altitude sickness is a thing. And to acclimatize, you go up a little bit, and then you come back down so your body can get used to it. And then you go up a little bit higher, then you come back down. And so we go to Camp 1, come down, Camp 2, come down, go to Camp 1, 2, and 3, and then come back down, and then finally it's time for a summit bid. So we had to go through this a lot of times, and it was kind of intimidating. But we started, and again, we started at night, which you can see here. It's not quite so intimidating because you can't really see anything other than where my headlamp's illuminating. But during the day, it really becomes obvious, and this is where the psychological component of mountain climbing comes into play. Because getting on a ladder that shifts in the ice is a little bit scary when you get on it and it starts rocking back and forth and you're clipped into 2 anchors, and the bottom of the crevasse is not visible to you. Then you also have to climb over the snow and ice walls to get to Camp 1. This is the upper part of the ice fall, where the ice fall starts breaking up into those chunks I was discussing. But finally, you end up on Camp 1 at a level surface where you can rest, and you're through the ice fall. But we had to do that 3 more times. So we had to go back down, go to base camp, and then a couple days later we came back up to Camp 1 and looked for Camp 2. Camp 2 is at the base of the Lhotse Mountain, which is that mountain in the back, and it's on the left side. And we're not going to go over all those crevasses. That's dangerous, so we had to go around, which added a lot of time and exertion, which at 50% of the oxygen that we're used to at sea level, dealing with half of that made it very, very exhausting, especially using expedition-style mountaineering. But we were able to do it, and we did it by relying on our friends and our colleagues and our climbing guides. Once we got to Camp 2, we were able to catch a breath, relax, and then we had to set our sights on going to Camp 3. Camp 3 sits on the side of a mountain slope at a high angle, such that if you were to fall, you would fall hundreds of feet, which could potentially kill you. So you have to get comfortable setting each step and making sure that you're always clipped into the rope at any time for everything, including going to the bathroom. So once we went to Camp 3, we were done with the acclimatization rotation, and we came back down to prepare for our summit bid. One more time through the ice fall, I just thought that was a cool picture. So we came back through the ice fall. We went to Camp 1, rested, then we went to Camp 2, took a rest day, and then we went to Camp 3. When I went on Camp 3, this was where I got oxygen for the first time. My oxygen saturation was in the 50s and 60s, and which is really low. And then when I got oxygen on, my oxygen saturation went back up to what it should be at sea level. And it was such a huge energy boost that it was a good psychological boost for me too. At this point, I was able to move much faster than I had, and we were able to get to Camp 3 in record time. So that's me and Migma at Camp 3. And at this point, helicopter rescue, if anything were to happen to you, is no longer a possibility. So to kind of make sure that we had a little bit of extra insurance, we had another Sherpa, whose name is Nima Sona, join us to kind of just accompany us in case of any emergency that were to crop up where we needed assistance. We slept on oxygen from Camp 3, and then we went up to Camp 4, which you can see here. Camp 4 is at 26,000 feet, or just a little bit above. Camp 4 is in an area known as the death zone. The death zone is any place above 26,000 feet, and it's called the death zone because your body just starts shutting down. The metabolism, cellular function, everything just does not really respond well to that very low atmospheric pressure. So the idea is to get up to Camp 4, summit as fast as you can, come down, and then get out as quickly as possible. And that's exactly what we did. So we enjoyed the view, we rested, and then at 8 p.m. we started for the summit. It was interesting to see that these are the heights of other mountains in the background, and we're kind of above most of them, which you can't tell from this picture, but Everest is still a couple thousand feet higher. So we started at 8 o'clock at night. With the oxygen, I was able to climb relatively quickly, and I made it about 3 hours quicker than anticipated. And I made it to the summit at 3:15 in the morning. It was very overwhelming to feel that I had accomplished this goal, which was something that I didn't even know about was possible when I was your age, and something that even when I started mountain climbing, I didn't think that was something I could do. It was also overwhelmingly beautiful, and I had such a sense of accomplishment. I was very proud of what I had done and the perseverance that it took. But I couldn't stay up there forever. We're in the death zone. So we had to come back down. Couldn't watch the sunrise because it was too dangerous. So we came down as the sun rose. And that's a picture of me and my climbing guide, Mingma. And this is Lhotse, one of the mountains that actually a friend of mine was climbing the same day that I was climbing Everest. We went back down to Camp 4, rested for an hour or two, and then we decided to get out of the death zone since I still had some energy. So we went down to Camp 2 that same exact day and got back to Camp 2 22 hours after starting for the summit bid. Rested that night, went down to base camp the next day, and then celebrated my birthday the day after that with a cake at base camp. Overwhelmingly positive experience for me, something that I never thought I could do. And truthfully, I thought being a doctor was a little bit tricky from time to time too, but I had some takeaways from this mountain that I wanted to share with you as far as goals that maybe you guys can keep with you. Number one is you can do more than you think you can. Everest is not unclimbable. Being a doctor isn't impossible. You just have to think outside the box and step out your comfort zone. Set yourself up for success. Make defined goals and create a clear roadmap to achieve them. And by that I mean I didn't climb Everest as my first mountain. I took small steps and had defined things that I wanted to learn on each additional mountain that I was able to combine to get to the top. Use the strength of the group. Use your friends, use your family, use your colleagues. Points on the mountain where I felt weak, and I was able to draw on the strengths of my colleagues. And some people struggled, and I hope I was able to return the favor. Learn from your past successes and failures. And by that, I would say that each mountain climb I did, I had something that I wish I had done just a little bit differently. And then I had some things that worked really great that I wanted to keep in my repertoire of tricks. So just keep track of things so that you can learn. And while I don't have enough time in this speech, one of the big things I learned was the hardest part of reaching your goal might not be what you think it is. And the roadblock that you've hit before you think you've hit the hard part might actually be the hardest part of all. So stick with it. If you find this roadblock, figure out how to get around it. And that's all I have. So thank you for listening. Minutes for questions if anybody has any. Yeah?
Would you please go back to that last slide? Thank you.
Oh, of course. Yes. I did not. No. Yes.
How long did it take you to climb Mount Everest?
2.5 months. Yes. Wherever you find them. You go wherever you can. Yes. What did I eat? A lot of freeze-dried food. We ate a lot of spam, a lot of rice, and there's a traditional Nepalese dish called dal bhat, which is a chicken curry. Yeah. What's spam? They sell it in the store. You can ask your mom to get you some and fry it for you. It's really good. Yeah. So the question was, did anybody get altitude sickness? and the answer is yes. But when we would come down with the acclimatization rotations, they would get better. So that was kind of one of the techniques. How many mountains have I climbed? Altogether, probably 50, 60. Yes, in the back?
Did anybody die when you were on the mountain?
Yes. Yes, there were a few deaths.
Are there ever animals to worry about on these climbs?
Animals to worry about? No, once you get to base camp, they have the yaks that come in as supply, and there are a lot of birds, but we're up so high that there's no animal. Do you have more time, or? Two more questions. Yes. Yes, it was. Yeah, so that's why we had all of this gear. Oops. We had a big snowsuit, and then I was actually wearing about 5 layers all the time. Yes. What time did what? So Everest has a climbing window, usually in May, depending on the weather, for about 3 weeks. So everybody who wants to climb Everest goes in March so that they can hit that climbing window in May. All right.